This occurred a long time ago in 2005. I was 18. I was living in a pretty impoverished area in Uvalde, Texas. The kind that's scattered throughout rural Texas when it's not directly outside of a metropolis. San Antonio was the city that was nearest to me. My parents could only afford to send me to a community college in my area, so I was attending there. Andrew, one of my closest high school pals, relocated to San Antonio so he could attend San Antonio College. He shared a small apartment with a roommate a short distance from the metropolis. He frequently had his girlfriend stay with him as well. I would visit him frequently because it's only about an hour and a half out of the city. This last weekend, he offered me to spend the night, so I drove my dependable 1995 Toyota pickup vehicle. Well, I was kidding. It was a useless piece of equipment. On it, the gas gauge didn't even function. All I would have to do is record the date of my most recent gas fill-up and then reset the trip miles. I traveled Route 90, which connected Uvalde and San Antonio in a direct line. At 3:30 p.m., I left for the road. Every Friday, there was no traffic. I arrived at Andrew's place on time. His girlfriend wouldn't arrive until the following day. We were going out tonight then. We went to a liquor store and spent some time drinking with his roommate in his place. The three of us then proceeded to this dingy bar where people would kind of ignore people wearing phony identification. That evening was ours. We returned at about 2 in the morning, following meal intake. I took a nap on the couch. It would have essentially been the same thing the following day, but Andrew and his girlfriend were fighting the entire time. As the night went on and the two of them grew more inebriated, she began beating him in front of me, which made things uncomfortable and awkward. I wasn't drinking much that day because I wasn't sure I wanted to spend the night with her there anyway. I finally decided to simply go home. I bid them all farewell and set out on my way home. It was nighttime, quite late. Midnight, maybe a little early, is my guess. At this point, Route 90 was desolate, so I would either fly or fly for my pickup requirements. But all of a sudden, the engine began to sputter. When I realized I had forgotten to fill up the tank, my heart fell entirely. It was already too late when I decelerated. The motor cut off. I pulled over to the side of the road and gave it a few jump starts, but to no avail. I pulled out my phone, which looked just as tacky as my truck. I looked for a signal, not a shot. I couldn't even make a help request. I could only hope that a kind Samaritan would pass while I put my hazards on. You have no idea how long I sat there by the side of the road before I noticed headlights. As the automobile got closer, I waved my arms, but it ignored me and sped by. A further 10 minutes or so later, this occurred once more. I was beginning to lose hope and thought maybe I should just sleep in my car and call for assistance when dawn came. I was therefore going to do it. I climbed into my car, removed the ignition key to deplete the battery, and simply reclined my seat to fall asleep. Every 10 minutes or so, I would hear a car speeding by, but it didn't seem necessary to warn people to be careful in the dark. I was about to fall asleep when I heard a car door close behind me, which startled me because it seemed suspicious to both me and the people in the cars. I noticed a car approaching from behind with its headlights out when I glanced in the rearview mirror. I spun around to take a closer look. There was a large pickup truck, but I was unable to make out anyone inside or outside of it. Perhaps a helper pulled over. When I got out of the automobile, I said, "Excuse me," but nobody answered. I took a step toward the truck to make sure nobody was inside. I then strolled back to my vehicle. This was strange. My gaze drifted over to the trees beside the road. Perhaps there was an indiscretion in the woods. I closed the door, my car, and went back inside. This was simply too strange. I heard a tap at my window out of the blue. I leapt. When I looked, I saw a man in the automobile smiling down at me. I have not yet taken any action. "Hey buddy, need a hand?" he exclaimed. I remarked, "Hey, I ran out of gas and I downed the window a little." "That's quite the situation," the man said. "Quickly step outside and assist me with this." To be honest, when he said this, I assumed he was asking for assistance with a petrol jug so I could fill up my tank or something. I closed the door after getting out of the truck, thinking he would show me how to go to his truck. However, He remained there, grinning and looking down at me despite his considerable height, said, "Please empty your pockets." It required a moment for me to comprehend his meaning. I have been driving a pickup truck since I was a broke college student. I wasn't about to be robbed of my phone and the only cash I had. I made a break for it, heading into the trees. I'm quick despite my small size. When I turned back, I saw that he was pursuing me. I zigzagged everywhere once I entered the trees and eventually felt as though I had lost him. I ducked behind a large tree to gather my breath after that. I held my breath till I got him closer. I was too afraid to move, but I don't know if he was just shouting it aloud in frustration or if he wanted me to hear it. I remained motionless even after I heard his footsteps recede. I remained like this until daybreak, finally hiding behind this large tree for the remainder of the night. The truck that had been following me disappeared when I crossed the highway again to get to my truck, but both of its doors were open. I discovered that everything relatively expensive had been taken out of my glove box. They also stole my flannel hoodie, which I'm sure contained stuff in the pocket. When I eventually succeeded in waving down a kind Samaritan, he offered to drive me to the nearest gas station. After purchasing a fuel can and filling it up with gas, the man returned me to my car. I then filled up my tank to the maximum capacity and drove the truck to a gas station to fill up completely before heading straight home. For me, this was an opportunity to learn in real life. Not everyone is decent, like the man who helped me, but some terrible people will try to take advantage of you when you're in a vulnerable position. I was incredibly naive and immature when I was 18. When I was driving, I was a real pain in the ass. Honking anytime I became irritated and almost cutting people off was something I regret doing now, and I'll be much stricter with my children when it comes to driving if I ever have any. I did, however, drive a lot for someone my age. I left for school, spending 5 hours away from my house. The closer I go to home, the worse the traffic is, no matter what day of the week. I'll thus drive home at night during breaks to prevent this. The distance traveled decreases from 4 to 5 hours to 3 hours. With the end of the autumn semester, it was the start of winter break. On the same day, every one of my friends headed home. I simply waited till later in the evening to leave because I abhor traffic more than anything. When I drove a Mazda 3, which I used to beat the living daylights out of, I was, to put it mildly, notorious for constantly taking my car to almost empty. Every time someone would remark on it while they were in the car with me, I would reassure them that even after the needle touched E, there would still be at least 30 miles left. The night I drove home from school, I realized I was mistaken. I had only been driving on the freeway for about an hour. Instead of using the map to find the closest gas station, I was taking a chance and waiting for a sign. The needle was on the letter E. I noticed I might have run the tank empty this time when the car started making strange noises and jolting. I hoped that the first off-ramp would take me directly to a gas station. However, this exit was dark, had no streetlights, and had only timber on either side of it. I wasn't sure if I would have enough petrol to find a gas station, so I was afraid to slow down and lose my speed. At the end of the ramp, I blew past the stop sign and turned quickly onto the connecting road, another dark lane encircled by forests. I was messed up. After a while, the automobile stopped and the engine died. When I pulled out my phone and saw I had no bars, things just got worse. My cell phone, T-Mobile, gets the poorest reception anywhere outside of a big city. I foolishly believed that 911 would always function, so I tried calling, not receiving anything. Naturally, it didn't. I had no idea what to do, and I was afraid. I activated my warning lights and bided my time till someone came into view. It took a while for me to notice the headlights getting closer. When I did, they passed me, performed a U-turn, and then drew up on the grass behind me after I shone my headlights at them. Who was coming out of that car was unknown to me. I was a helpless 18-year-old girl. I slightly opened the window as this man got closer to my automobile. I ran out of gas and told him I needed help. He offered to drive me to the closest convenience store. He was a bald man wearing spectacles. He gave out a somewhat reliable vibe. I seemed to have no choice but to accept his offer. I made sure to lock my doors before I followed him to his car after getting out of mine. He drove a black Honda, most likely from 2010. In his automobile, there was an odd odor. I was unable to identify the smell, though. He executed a flawless U-turn and resumed his previous path of travel. He spoke with me, inquiring about my origins and such routine matters. Sincerely, I told him that I was taking a car home from school. He claimed to be a resident. Additionally, hardly a lot of visitors from outside the area exit the highway for this sleepy small hamlet. There were no buildings along the route we were walking. It was all wood. He replied, "Yeah, just a way up the road." When I asked whether he knew of any petrol stations, something started to thud and bounce from the back of the car. It had a trunk-like sound. Initially, I assumed it might have been nothing more than little potholes or a stray item in the trunk. He gave the impression that he would never stop talking. We finally arrived at an area that resembled a town. Finally, there were some structures and lights, along with a diner and a couple of tiny houses. When I got into his car, the first junction had a red light. Our vehicle stopped. There was silence for the first time. Then I could hear someone screaming within the trunk. Dolphin wants and thumps came next. I turned to face the man I turned to face. In an instant, he attempted to grab me and drag me back into the car as I unbuckled my seatbelt, opened the door, and bolted. He got out too, and I heard him floor it down the street, but instead of running after me, he went to shut his passenger side door. I rushed into the diner and made a dramatic request for assistance. I called 911 using their phone. While I waited there, the situation grew significantly, with several police officers visiting the restaurant to take a report. They had to obtain for me every last detail regarding the man's car, his appearance, and the location of where he picked me up. Considering the seriousness of the complaint I was making, that I had heard someone in the car's trunk, to include the pickup location in the report. They also gave me a ride back to my car. They also assisted me in contacting AIA, which would finally arrive at my house to fill up my automobile. All in all, I had the scariest experience of my life during this. For the remainder of the ride home, I felt completely unsettled. I hope that man has been located. Whoever was inside that trunk, I hope is still with us. That man might have been taking me to his house or somewhere else, for all I know. It was simply my luck to be able to leave at that red light. I'm a Morgan, North Carolina resident in Burke County. I'm accustomed to the tranquil way of life that comes with being a country resident. Occasionally, strange characters will appear, but overall, nothing too horrible. Along with my spouse, I own a lovely piece of land. My job hours are not consistent. I work both days and nights sometimes. It must have been around 3 in the morning because this occurred on a night when I was heading home from a night shift. I was hungry and exhausted, and all I wanted to do was grab some food and go home. My phone was also almost dead. I bought $10 worth of gas and a prepackaged sandwich at this gas station, which I then ate inside the cafe. So for a short while, before he left the premises without making a purchase, a dubious-looking guy was observing me. I went outside to get petrol after eating, and then I got back in the car. For some reason, the scent of gasoline was very strong. I was driving carefully because these are very dark and winding roads at night, and I was also exhausted from a hard day at work when something unexpected happened. Abruptly, the low gas light illuminated and began to beep as the gas gauge's needle fell to E. I was clueless about the situation. In addition to the fact that I don't drive and had never run out of gas before, the needle just plummeted. Initially, I assumed there was a glitch in the computer, so I stopped and turned the car back on, but the needle remained on E. The engine died while I attempted to drive. I began experiencing panic attacks. Thankfully, my husband answered the phone when they contacted him first thing. I smelt gasoline as soon as I got out of the car and questioned him how my car ran out of gas when I had just filled it. "It sounds like I leaked," he replied when I told him this. He promised to come over immediately away. He would contact a roadside help provider. However, I heard a car approaching without headlights, and it abruptly came to a stop not far behind my vehicle. I asked my spouse if there was a chance to bring up the dubious man who was observing me at the petrol station, claiming that he had damaged my car. Suddenly, my husband's tone became more disturbed and concerned. "Yes," he said. "There's a possibility he severed my gasoline line. All I knew was that I had to run, and I had no idea what that meant." I unlocked the door, removed my keys from the ignition, and turned on the headlights. I urged him to text me when he got close because my phone was only on 2L. I turned off the street and headed for the first house I came across. I dashed up the yard and along the lengthy driveway to the front door. The house's lights were all off. Even so, I rang the bell several times. After a while, a light came on and the door opened. A 60-year-old man unlocked the door. It appeared as though he had just woken up. I begged to go inside so I could charge my phone and conceal. He had to explain a little before he fully opened the door and let me in. He stated he would go get an iPhone charger when I asked for one, then motioned for me to take a seat in the living room. Still wearing my scrubs as a nurse, I sat down feeling a range of emotions. From the kitchen, the man shouted out to me, asking if I would like some water. "Please say yes," I said. He had no idea that I could see his reflection in the living room mirror that overlooked the kitchen. I watched him pour water into a cup. I swear I saw him dump something into the lake after that. The faucet continued to run even after he moved out of the mirror's line of sight. The conclusion: before he switched it off, he ran for a good 30 seconds more. After returning to the living room, he gave me a drink of water. After I thanked him, he sat down, just stared at me, and asked me to repeat the details of the issue. I answered him back. All I wanted was chargers so I could get on the phone with my hubby. "Oh right," he thought and got upstairs. When I looked at my phone, it had one left. I texted my spouse my position, just in case, using the last of that power. After that, I sniffed the glass of water, and even though it didn't smell particularly good, I could tell. At this point, I had to choose whether or not to leave. I had a serious need to charge my phone. However, I was positive he had tampered with this water 99% of the time. I caught him making his way back down the steps. He added that since he uses an Android phone, he doesn't have any iPhone chargers. I stood up and headed straight for the door when he said this. I am not a moron. I excited and sprinted down the driveway to the road. I wanted to throw up. It was astounding to me that two distinct incidences with two distinct males occurred on the same night. I slipped up the stairs. My phone's battery failed at this exact moment, just as I was taking it out to send my new location. I waited until my husband's truck's recognizable headlights appeared. Thank God, it was him as I went outside and waved my arms. I told him all I was feeling and cried about what I had just gone through when I got inside the truck. There was no automobile behind mine when he brought us to it. However, my rear glass was broken, and it seemed like someone had entered the rear seat. However, there was nothing valuable left in my car for someone to steal. My car's battery had completely died. I also told my spouse about the prospective roofie who attempted to approach me. He wanted to go break down his door because he was so enraged. However, I told him no. Let us simply await the arrival of the tow truck. It took a bit for it to arrive. My dealership had the car towed there, and they planned to pick it up the following day. My spouse was correct. My car's fuel line was fully severed and vandalized. Thank heavens, I took a few days off as I needed some time to process what had happened that evening. The notion that I was on the verge of being a victim of some dubious, I simply couldn't move on from her.